Hi there, my name is Julia Heeb, curator and manager of the Museumsdorf Düppel in Berlin. Our medieval open-air museum is part of the City Museum Berlin, a foundation comprising 5 further museums in the city center of Berlin. As one of the partners of the EU project RETOLD, I will present our journey towards documenting archaeological house models which have been built throughout the last 50 years. During the last 20 to 30 years, archaeological house reconstructions have increased considerably. Touristic development is often the main catalyst for financing these projects. Documentation is not often a high priority. However, there is a wealth of knowledge locked in the wooden posts and wattle and daub walls. This knowledge can only be harnessed if the entire process of planning, building and using the house models is documented. That this has rarely been done, and how to deal with moving towards a standardized documentation shall be illustrated using the Museumsdorf Düppel as an example. Between 1967 and 1990, the site of the present-day open-air museum was excavated as part of a research project by the Stadtmuseum for Pre- and Early History of Berlin. The excavation was designed to shed some light on the settlement patterns around 1200 AD, a time when settlers from the western regions of Germany started to move eastwards into Slavic territories. The excavation brought to light a medieval settlement which was in use between about 1180 and 1230. The village consisted of several house features, a possible palisade, wells and tar production pits. The finds consisted mainly of pottery. There was some anaerobic preservation in the wells, which meant that some of the well construction itself survived, as well as a fragment of a staved bowl. Besides these two categories, a few iron objects like a fire steel, stirrup and spores, as well as animal bones, were recovered. In the excavated area, about 14 houses or building structures could be identified, not all of them very clear-cut though. Unfortunately, most of the written documentation of the excavation has been lost. Some interim reports suggest, however, that some buildings were log houses, as in some areas only very compacted floor material, as well as fire pits were found without any post holes. The majority of buildings were wooden post constructions, some of them with split plank walls. During the early years of the excavation, the idea was born to create an open-air museum showing the excavation results to a wider public. However, the museum institutions as well as the city council were not interested, paving the way for the foundation of a volunteer society. Founded in 1975, the Friends Society of the Museumsdorf Düppel began building houses, making pottery, and rediscovering the different techniques of medieval textile production amongst other crafts, as volunteers coming from a variety of backgrounds. Without these idealists, the Museumsdorf Düppel would not exist today. In the 1970s, the volunteers were in contact with other experimental projects like Butser Ancient Farm in the UK. The term experimental archaeology was taken seriously in the activities carried out in Düppel. This is particularly true for the tar and pitch production group of the Friends Society. Through experimentation, they were able to discover the pit production method for tar and pitch, which had been unknown until then. Only after their experiments were archaeologists able to see this method on excavations and interpret it accordingly. According to some old photographs, a similar rigor was applied to the planning process of reconstructing the houses. Working with such scarce evidence, mainly post holes and some wall features, archaeologists and historic building specialists were consulted for designing viable smaller models before the houses were built. Unfortunately, these processes were either not documented or the documentation was lost. The same problem also relates to the construction process itself. The construction was not systematically documented, and most of the documentation which might have existed was lost or was taken home by some of the volunteers. It is also the case that the sense of achievement in building a house is immense, and quite often the emotional aspects supersede the need to document the entire process transparently. It is understandable. However, the future uses of an archaeological house reconstruction can go way beyond creating a possible version of the past for our visitors and volunteers alike. The construction of the house models is mostly based on below-ground archaeological features like postholes and fire pits. In other words, the above-ground structures are interpretations of a possible outcome. In order to show this difficulty, we created a little exhibition of which this comic is a part of, illustrating how 4 postholes can be made into several different houses. In guided tours, this aspect can be touched upon. However, visitors who explore the museum on their own all too easily assume that the houses in the medieval period looked like the reconstructed houses today. This is why it is important to impart this critical way of thinking in a number of different ways for the visitors. Trying to start a process of documentation today, one firstly has to look at what is actually there. One potential source for reconstructing the documentation for the existing houses is the archive material, like the minutes of the board and working group meetings of the Friends Society, as well as old photographs. We have begun to sift through the minutes and other correspondence, looking for clues on the reconstructive process of the houses. This work is not finished and will take some more time. However, we already have a much clearer picture of the life histories of the Düppel house models. One of the most important documents is a Word file on the history of the reconstructed houses in the Museumsdorf Düppel, written and added to by a long-standing volunteer, Dieter Totenhaupt. He gathered as much information as he could, added repairs and other work done to the houses, and kept the document up to date until he had to retire from volunteering. He took photographs, he keeps at home. The old slides are all numbered and referred to in the Word document. At the moment we are preparing to digitize all relevant slides he keeps at home on the reconstructed houses. Although this document is immensely important, it does not cover everything, especially the first years, when the houses were built, are not recorded in detail, as the information was already missing when Dieter Totenhaupt started to put together the document. In the everyday running of an open-air museum, questions on the durability of houses, charred wooden posts compared to plain wooden posts, and different roof coverings were posed. Other colleagues working in higher education were also asking these questions. However, it was not possible to give clear answers that would withstand scientific standards. And even if our museum had collected data in a coherent way, the set would have been too small to give statistically relevant answers. If, on the other hand, other open-air museums would collect data in a comparable way, the data set would grow and be increasingly useful for researchers. In 2018 and 2019, I talked repeatedly with colleagues from other open-air museums about the need to standardize the documentation of reconstructed houses and how best to achieve this. When EXARC approached our museum to take part in an EU project on documentation, the answer was simple. Within the EU project RETOLD, the Museumsdorf Düppel was primarily responsible for developing parameters for documenting house reconstructions. After researching documentation strategies used by other open-air museums, both archaeological ones as well as ethnographic, the results of this survey were used, together with our own experiences, to create a first draft of documentation forms. These forms were evaluated and used as the basis for creating the web-based workflow for standardized documentation. The aim is to make this workflow tool as easy to use as possible, while at the same time standardizing data in such a way that it is comparable. After a number of different development stages, the content of the original forms has changed through testing. The prototypes of these documentation features are now in the last phases of testing on the RETOLD website. It is only when actually filling in fields and uploading documents that problems with the original ideas become apparent. Missing fields, what should be mandatory, what should not, etc. Some issues become only apparent when adding a number of objects, as each object differs slightly and might bring up different problems. So, the work in progress stage is a lot longer than originally anticipated. However, the results so far look indeed promising, and the next stage will have to look at how to roll out these features for as many open-air museums as possible. At the same time as working on the content of the EU project, other aspects relating to the topic of documentation were pursued. An experimental archaeology collection has been created in the collections database DAPHNE at the Stadtmuseum. Here, all data on the archaeological house reconstructions in the Museumsdorf Düppel, experimental reference collections, as well as the results of experiments and experimental replicas are to be documented, archived and made accessible via the online collection. Long-term data on historical house reconstructions, especially the frequency of necessary maintenance work, can be important not only for archaeological research, but also for research on monument protection. A further related project is the cooperation with the Technical College HTW in Berlin to create 3D scans of the reconstructed houses at the Museumsdorf Düppel. After the historic houses were recorded from the outside as 3D scans by the HTW in a first approved Digis project, the interiors of the houses were 3D recorded in a second project. The project Düppel 3D includes the further digitization of cultural assets with a focus on the interiors as well as the digitization of additional artifacts and objects to impart knowledge using virtual reality and game technology in the form of an interactive 3D experience. The 3D models are a great way to document and are being used as part of the RETOLD project as well. In order to have more data on the present-day state of the house reconstructions, we carried out a structural damage assessment. With the help of an external professional, the condition of our reconstructed houses was evaluated in order to obtain an accurate assessment of the houses. The findings can then be used to derive maintenance measures and set priorities. The results show that above ground, the houses are in better condition than assumed. However, the subsoil parts of most wooden posts has critical damage and need to be replaced. The results of the building damage assessment can help to build the houses more durably and effectively, identify repair needs, and make maintenance measures more sustainable. The different avenues and side projects which appeared alongside the EU project are just as valuable and will add to the overall goal of unlocking the potential of the archaeological house reconstructions at the Museumsdorf Düppel for researchers and visitors alike. In terms of standardized documentation, the benefits will only become evident after some years and many participants. This means an easy way to document is important. In conclusion, we can say that the relative straightforward wish to standardize documentation and to get the archive and information on the house reconstructions in order has grown into a large-scale project with different facets and corporations. The work is not finished by a long way and will continue into the future. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have questions or suggestions, please get in touch.